Hello and welcome to the second installment of my new series, Does X Deserve Love? This time I take a deep dive into medical romances with doctors, nurses, and surgeons. Oh my. I will be asking the question, do I think that these characters deserve their happily ever after? Now, I'm going to wager a little prediction before we dive right in. Unlike the billionaire romances, I think that doctors are going to be a lot more deserving of love. Not all of them. I'm predicting half of them will be terrible jerks, with others will be on board with them, riding off into the sunset with their love. Anyway, unlike with my previous video, I learned my lesson. 50 books is way too many for me to read, so I'm going to cap it at a mere 10, which means that I think that 5 of them will have terrible romantic leads who are undeserving of their happy ending. Before anybody comes for me, my husband did raise a good point when I told him about this project. He said, "Don't you go out of your way to read terrible stuff?" Yes, I do. But at the same time, I literally Googled lists of medical romances and grabbed the first ones from the list that weren't like part 2 of a series or repeats from an author. So if these books are bad, then you should take fault at whoever composed that list for giving bad recommendations. The first book I found on a list of medical romances was Wrong by Jenna Aston. Now, it took me a while to slog through all of the billionaire romances, like a long time. I probably spent at the minimum a month reading them. But I started reading Wrong at about 10:30 a.m. on Sunday, July 2nd. I knew this because my mother-in-law dragged us to church when we were on holiday with her. I finished reading this book at 3 p.m. So you must take my quick reading of it as a good sign, right? That I wouldn't have gorged myself on the novel if it wasn't good, right? Yes and no. Yes, the romance is a lot better than literally anything that I read for the billionaire romance video, but the bar is literally set at doesn't rape the main character. It's so far on the ground it doesn't take much to actually get over it. So, do I think that Luke Miller deserved his happy ending? I'm gonna go ahead and give this one a soft yes. The main character of Sophie is an undergrad and a virgin. She thinks that she's going to give that up to her boyfriend, so she goes to the university clinic to get a prescription for birth control. Only to her surprise, the hunky guy who comes in weekly for a coffee turns out to be the volunteer doctor, one that Sophie has been having spicy thoughts about since she first walked into the coffee shop where she works. Not long after that, Luke and Sophie end up on 2 different dates at the same restaurant. However, things go wrong when Luke apparently overhears Sophie's boyfriend bragging about how he's going to make another sex tape tonight. Luke takes Sophie back to his apartment where she promised her roommate that she could have the room on her own to do her own boyfriend that night. Now, this is where it starts to get iffy, because they end up having their first time a few hours after this, when Sophie had been so drunk that she hadn't even realized what was going on until Luke had her out in his car trying to take her home. Like, I don't care if you have the hots for this girl, I don't care if she practically flung herself at you, you simply do not have sex with somebody who is drunk. Drunk people cannot consent. Full stop. End of discussion. Yes, their relationship was a lot nicer than most others that I've been reading recently. He actually respected her wishes. When he tried to take her shopping for an evening dress she could wear to a hospital gala event and the store made her uncomfortable, they left. He didn't try to force his will onto her, didn't try to convince her to be something that clearly made her uncomfortable. He also took an interest in the things that she liked. Granted, we never actually saw Sophie doing pretty much anything if it wasn't making coffee and doing Luke, but at the same time, Sophie likes crazy socks. He bought her all kinds of crazy socks, if only because it made her happy. Christian Grey would never, could never. There was also kind of a neutral scene when Luke was angry at Sophie, and it would have set off all sorts of red flags in a billionaire romance. But the reason why he was angry was because Sophie had gotten so drunk that she literally couldn't remember going home with her brother. It was a scene of genuine concern for her well-being, especially because it was only the second time she'd met her brother. But there were a few red flags that turned it into a soft yes. So, the first being his ex-fiancée, Gina. Right off the bat, Luke told Sophie that he was a fertility expert who helped really wealthy women get pregnant, which, okay, fine. But then he hid his relationship with Gina from Sophie. He brushed it off, made it seem like it wasn't a big deal. She had to find out about this relationship from Luke's terrible family, and then Gina herself told Sophie that they were getting back together. Typical mean girl business, so whatever. But I kind of saw rad when Gina told Sophie that she was seeing Luke to try and get pregnant. Now, I feel like I don't really know much about doctor ethics to get into that, nor do I want to, but it was terrible of Luke to not only brush his continuing relationship, yes, even a doctor-patient relationship, with Gina under the rug. But there is also no real reason why he couldn't have sat Sophie down and told her all of this. No reason except to add even the littlest bit of conflict and drama to this otherwise bland story. Yes, he later did tell Sophie that he'd stopped being her doctor after he found out that Gina kept saying all these terrible things to Sophie, but at the same time, dude, why? Why would you simply not tell your current girlfriend why your ex-fiancé kept hanging around so much? Of course, now that I'm thinking about it, I think that the main reason why this book didn't take any time at all for me to finish was simply because literally nothing of value happened. Gina was pretty much the only drama that lasted for more than a single chapter, and even the scenes with Gina were kind of lackluster. And something else that really rubbed me the wrong way was that Luke hid Sophie's pregnancy from her for like a week. He knew because he was a doctor and he had access that normal people wouldn't have had, but at the same time, since he decided to take her medical care into his own hands rather than to let Sophie's actual doctor tell her this, he decided to withhold the information. And then he finally told her, but only after he saw her taking one of her birth control pills. He thought that she knew, even knowing full well that Sophie religiously took her birth control pills and was determined to not end up with an unwanted pregnancy like her own mother had been stuck with. The narration kind of hand waved it away by glossing over the idea that Gina had had an abortion and Luke not wanting to pressure her into it, but the fact that he hid the actual news of her pregnancy from her for a week, kind of weird move to make, man. Luke also did move her in with him after she'd fallen down the stairs without asking for her permission, so that should also probably be mentioned. She wasn't happy about any of that, obviously, but this was immediately overshadowed by the baby bombshell, so it wasn't really brought back up again. In the end, I don't think it matters since she ended up with him anyway, but still, kind of a red flag to move somebody in without actually, telling them first. So yeah, I think he does deserve love, but at the same time, he was kind of terrible, but not half as terrible as any of these billionaires. I don't know, man. Maybe my measurement of terrible men has been broken by the bar being set at "Don't rape her." Up next, I tackled Beautifully Awake by Riley Mackenzie. Now, before I start reading any book, I always take a peek to see what some of the reviews have to say, and a lot of people were complaining about the privacy violations involved in this book. I'm not a doctor, but even I was like, couldn't he have asked a nurse to do it? Anyway, do I think that Chase deserved his happy ending? No, but that's also a soft no with a lot of context needed. Right when Chase met Lily, I don't know how to pronounce this name. My brain kept flip-flopping between the two the entire book. He forced her into his house and demanded that she sushi with him, which she told the readers that she doesn't even like. But then their first romantic encounter was right after a partially botched surgery. The botching business was done by the doctor intern, and Chase, the chief of surgery, was overseeing this. He got angry, dragged Lily out from the surgery, once again forced her into his house where he proceeded to sexually assault her. Following this, the rest of the relationship was fairly standard. Aside from the fact that their jobs were at the same hospital, I didn't feel like they had anything in common, and even then, he was a literal brain surgeon, and she was a social worker. Their jobs couldn't have possibly been any more different. I will say one thing though. I think that this is the first book I've read where the female lead wasn't immediately put off when the rich guy offered to buy things for her. And what's up with that? Of course you could buy me a new car, a new wardrobe, and a new house. Don't mind if I do. But the problem with these stories that not only feature the insta love but also have little to no actual drama is that I don't freaking care. They're banging. Let's move on to the next chapter. Oh, they're banging again. And again. And oh my god, why? I'm getting to the point with these romances where I barely read the sex scenes anymore. But in a book like Beautifully Awake with endless sex scene after sex scene, even if you were into the relationship to begin with, I think anybody would be equally as bored with it as I was. There was also never any real drama. The best I can come up with is that Lily's backstory was that she was raped, impregnated during this, miscarried, and dropped the charges, and then ran away to the city to try and start over. But this was literally never brought up again. We never saw justice for Lily. Is it true to real life? Yes, it is, but I'm not reading these books for realism. I'm reading them because I want to escape from reality. And the ending, oh no, I'm so angry with the ending. Also, this is the second medical book in a row where it ended with the female lead being pushed down the stairs when the doctor found out that she was pregnant. What's up with that? Overall, this book wasn't the worst that I've read, but Chase was objectively terrible towards Lily. He treated her more like some prize that he wanted to show off to the other doctors at the hospital, rather than somebody who had their own opinions, which, yes, included not eating sushi and not wanting to be sexually assaulted by him after surgery. So yeah, I don't think that this guy who demanded that the social worker be with him in the OR with him simply because she was pretty, who demanded that she eat food when he wanted to eat, and who sexually assaulted her simply because he was frustrated, deserves love. No matter what he did for the rest of the book, the entire thing was tainted because their romantic relationship began when he sexually assaulted her. Up next, I read Hot Shot Dog by R.S. Gray. Do I think that Matt deserved his happy ending? Yes, I do. And for once, this is a fairly easy decision to make. When the readers are first introduced to Matt, he's kind of this rude doctor who yells at other medical staff for doing stuff wrong. However, he's yelling at them because literal children's health is on the line, and when somebody screws up, a child's health is seriously compromised. And in my opinion, this is the kind of doctor that you want in your corner, somebody who isn't afraid to get down to business to fight that you receive the best kind of care. When his relationship with Bailey kicks off, Bailey gets scared and asks him to sign some BS form that she found online. Something that basically promises that they'll only be friends and that there won't be any sort of hanky-panky. Full stop. In literally any other book, the male lead would have completely disregarded this. However, despite Matt knowing that the contract he signed wasn't legally binding, he still respects Bailey's wishes. Christian Grey could never, would never. Now, as far as plot goes, I thought that it was rather on the thin side. It had a tiny bit more substance than in Wrong, but in that it took longer for Matt and Bailey to actually get to the romance aspect, mainly thanks to the aforementioned non-legally binding contract business. But at the same time, once they finally did hook up, it was kind of nothing but sunshine and rainbows and watching Christmas movies with Bailey's kid sister that she was raising. It was so freaking boring that I ended up skimming large chunks of text in the hopes that literally anything would start to happen. In the last, 5 chapters or so, there was a tiny bit of conflict where Matt won a grant to start up a new hospital in Costa Rica. He wanted Bailey to move there to be with him. She said, "Our relationship is 2 weeks old. I'm not going to uproot not only my life, but also not my sister's life for a 2-week relationship," which is 100% fair. But in the end, she and Josie moved to Costa Rica, so even the conflict barely lasted more than a couple of chapters, and it was barely an inconvenience at best. Story-wise, Hotshot Doc wasn't the greatest, but as far as love interests who don't sexually assault the female lead within the first 2 chapters, this one passed with flying colors. Next, I made an attempt to read Medicine Man by Saffron A. Kent, the keyword being try. Right from the get-go, even before I started reading this book, I knew that it was going to be difficult. Let me read the summary for you. Willow Taylor lives in a castle with large walls and iron fences, but this is no ordinary castle. It's called Heartstone Psychiatric Hospital, and it houses 40 other patients. It has nurses with mean faces and tucks with permanent frowns. It has a man as well, a man who is cold and distant, whose voice drips with authority, and whose piercing gray eyes hide secrets and maybe linger on her face a second too long. Willow isn't supposed to look deep into those eyes. She isn't supposed to try to read his tightly leashed emotions, and neither is she supposed to touch herself at night imagining his powerful voice and that cold but beautiful face. No, Willow Taylor shouldn't be attracted to Simon Blackwell at all, because she's a patient and he's her doctor, her psychiatrist. Immediately no. A doctor hooking up with a patient is already such a huge no-no, and it's made a billion times worse when the patient literally cannot give consent because they're in a mental health facility and can't leave. And before anybody says anything, the doctor did start seeing a patient in Wrong by Jenna Aniston, but as soon as they became serious, he turned to her and said, "I can't be your doctor anymore." It's that simple. But I was willing to give it a shot regardless, but when I got to the part where the main character told the doctor that she once saw a dead body and wished that it was her, I had to stop. This ain't it. I am legitimately worried for the author, but also the people in the reviews who are gushing over how much they love this book. Let's hope that the rest of the books aren't going to be like this. I'm all for dissecting dark romances, but I'm obviously drawing the line with suicide ideation. Up next, I read Pleasure Unbound by Larissa Ione. Before I get into it, I had a few problems with the book. Not because it was bad, but because the main character was a demon, and I feel like there was a lot of stuff that only made sense within the context of the book, but if Mick Dreamy tried some of the same stuff, I'd be screaming foul. So, do I think that Eledion, I don't know how this is supposed to be pronounced, don't come for me, deserved his happy ending? Despite my comment a second ago trying to defend my views on the story, I kind of have to say that no, Eldion did not deserve love. Like so many of you, when I read Breaking Dawn, I was screaming foul and pedophile over the idea of Jacob being forever bound to a literal baby. Yes, do I feel like he was a bit of a victim, but come on, man. In Pleasure Unbound, Eldion knew exactly what his problem was, and he was desperate to find a mate. Unlike in the Twilight series, this was 100% a choice that Eldion was making here. He pushed Taylor into this without ever actually sitting down and asking her if it was something that she might be willing to consider for more than a few seconds. He started the bond, again without her consent. I'd like to remind everybody that this novel took place only over a couple of days, probably not more than 2 weeks at the most. So the entire thing basically boiled down to a man forcing a woman into a forever relationship because he was desperate to not turn into a horrifying monster and kill a bunch of people. And a woman that he met on Tuesday, and it's now Saturday. Also, this book felt like little more than an excuse for the author to write spicy scene after spicy scene. It got real old real fast. Up next, I read The Doctor by Nikki Sloan. This was another case of finishing a book too quickly, as I started reading this when I boarded a flight from Orlando to Denver and finished before we got to Colorado. Ugh. And why do I think Grey deserves love? This is This is another case of no, but it's complicated. Look, I can excuse a lot of stuff within the context of a book. The dude hooking up with his son's girlfriend minutes after they broke up, kinda weird, but they did break up, and it's hardly Cassie's fault that Preston refused to believe slash accept this. I don't even mind the April-December romance. But the part that put it into no territory for me was when Greg told Cassidy that he had been having fantasies about her when she came over for prom. That's right, high school prom. Regardless of if she was over 18 at the time, it never said either way. The entire thing is weird and a little creepy. So at the end of the day, despite how good Greg was to Cassidy, especially when you compare him to Preston's treatment of Cassidy, it was difficult for me to move past that. Although I do have to say, if you're going to end a doctor romance with a female lead in the hospital in an effort for that final act resolution, at least do an actual medical emergency rather than something dong and give us a pregnancy bombshell. I have to say no. The book that I read next was A Quick Bite by Lindsay Sands, and this book is a lot along the lines of Pleasure Unbound in that the main character wasn't exactly human. That being said, it's hard for me to quantify this book in terms of does the doctor deserve love, mainly because in the prologue of this novel the doctor was literally kidnapped by vampires. Then we find he's being held against his will in the vampire house and is asked to help psychologically heal the female lead. Now, if my question was, does the female lead's kind of terrible mother deserve love, then the answer to that question would be an immediate no. She literally kidnapped the doctor rather than to make an appointment like a normal person. So I hope that you can understand me when I explain to you that answering the question of does Greg deserve his happy ending is something that I had a difficult time answering. Overall, I thought that his relationship with Lacey was it wasn't great. It suffered from instant love syndrome. They met on Tuesday, and by Friday, he was turning into a vampire so they could be together forever. Slow down there, guys. But at the same time, you also have to remember that I'm thinking about more toxic leads like Christian Grey, who raped Anna because she rejected him, and that one male lead who forced his girlfriend to live with him, even going so far as to hide all of her clothes so that she couldn't leave. So yes, while this story had a lot, and I mean a lot, of WTF in it, I do think that both Greg and Lacey deserve their happy ending. This wasn't exactly on my list. In fact, I added Edible Delectables by Amy Wiseman to my reading queue long before I thought to do this Deserve Love series. But regardless, the male lead in the book was a doctor, so I decided to include it as well. So does Jason deserve love? I'd say yes. This was yet another book featuring literally no plot, so little plot that I get excited at the thought that somebody was trying to break up the relationship through miscommunication, but alas, that never happened and we were left with literally nothing. This book also did involve a third act breakup. From the point of a reader, I hate that trope, but from the point of logic, I understand why it happened. Jason got a fellowship in another state and decided to accept it. He also broke up with Cara because he knew that not only were her friends and her family in Texas, but also her bakery, that he couldn't expect her to drop everything to be with him. And at the same time, his career as a doctor was more important to him than some, I want to say, 5-month relationship. At the end, they got back together, only decided to get married, so the book ended on that note. But in this book's case, as for the question of does Jason deserve love, I felt like the lack of plot helped the answer, since there were never any terrible romance tropes going on here. No cheating, no manipulations, no nothing. It made for an obvious answer. Did it make for a good book? No, but at least Jason wasn't being an abusive jerk. Up next, I read Dear Bridget, I Want You by Penelope Ward. So, do I think that Simon deserves love? Yes, and let me explain my answer. In the story, Simon is painted as this creepy womanizer who can and often does lure many women to his bed, and I can assure you that the same thing that's running through your head was going through mine at the start of the story. So when he starts turning his attention to Bridget, the woman who's renting him a room, I was like, slam on the brakes there, babe. She's a widow with a kid. She doesn't need your drama. However, his playful flirting was nothing more than that. When she told him to stop, he stopped. He only moved forward when she accidentally gave him a note detailing all of the things she wanted him to do to her. He invited her to come watch him pleasure himself and didn't push her to do things that she wasn't comfortable with. What's more is that when she said that they shouldn't be seen sleeping in the same room because of her son, he respected not only her wishes, but also her desire to respect her son. Unrelated, but I love Simon's relationship with Bridget's son, Brendan. It was so sweet, and it was obvious that he really cared for the boy at the end, especially when he asked Brendan's permission to marry his mom. I was a little wary when Simon found out the truth of exactly how Bridget's husband had died and how she'd been having an affair, but he didn't keep it a secret from her for longer than necessary, and he was quite open with it. So yes, Simon's actions in this book prove that you can have a steamy doctor romance even with a womanizer male lead without him being an abusive jerkwad. Then I read Dr. Dan by Kay Webster. Yes, the same lady who wrote that dark romance notice I read on Patreon a while ago. So I kind of went in expecting along the same kind of lines. And although this wasn't as completely demented as Nurse, I still don't think that Dr. Dan deserves love. The titular Dr. Dan is a 45-year-old doctor who becomes obsessed with an 18-year-old Lauren. If the only thing he was doing was being concerned for her physical health, then maybe I could get behind it. The same level of House MD nonsense. But he was obsessed with her romantically and sexually, which was beyond creepy. I'm all for a good age gap, but throughout the novel, Dan kept mentioning his own daughter, Jenna, who was the same age as Lauren. The entire thing was creepy, it was predatory. Throughout their first date, they kept mentioning that, oh, people are going to think that we're in a sugar daddy, sugar baby relationship. Like, great, thank you for acknowledging this. However, the acknowledgement that normal 40-somethings aren't supposed to date fresh out of high school students somehow made the romance that much worse. I also felt like they didn't really have anything in common, which is something pretty icky in a lot of these age gap relationships. Maybe if she's interested in a medicine career or something, but no. As usual, their only common ground was how badly that they wanted to be together physically. Nothing else. Lauren was also suffering from too stupid to live syndrome, which is bad enough in other books, but this moron had kidney disease. So I hope I don't have to explain to you that this is the most literal sense of this. But the author hand-waved all of that away in the quickest way possible, simply so that they could get back to banging. Finally, I wrapped this up with Houston, We Have a Problem by Aaron McCarthy. I thought that this was going to take place in Texas, but no, the male lead was named Houston, and I'm not sure that it somehow made the book better. Anyway, do I think that Houston deserved love? No, but another with one of those giant asterisks. Right off the bat, we're introduced to Houston by way of him mooning over Josie during their work at the hospital. He convinces her that they should sleep together simply so that they can remove the sexual tension to be able to better focus on during surgeries. My problem with that is that Josie said no, that she had no interest in putting her career on the line for a few hours at the max of carnal pleasure, that she didn't do hookups and one-night stands. Houston convinced her to do it anyway, and after they banged, to the surprise of literally nobody, it fixed literally nothing. Which is leading to my problem not only with this book, but with a lot of romance novels that I seem to be reading recently. The idea that the male lead is too damaged to be in a long-term relationship because of the stuff that his daddy had done psychologically to him when he was a child. Around and around Houston and Josie went, Houston refusing to admit that he wants to be with Josie because he loves her, Josie refusing to give in because she's looking for something more than what ended up being a 1-hour roll on the carpet. Although I was kind of on the fence over this was a deserved love situation or not. Like, convincing somebody and then them calling you up to say that they've changed their mind is hardly my breaking point. Not when a lot of these other stories start with the female lead being sexually assaulted. But what really broke me was the end of the book, when Houston sat down with another doctor and decided that Josie should be transferred to another medical facility. And they gave Josie these marching orders without ever once actually sitting Josie down to tell her any of this. Of course she's angry at you, dude. The fact that this book had a happy ending honestly felt so forced because of that. Like, I would have moved away and burned bridges. Forget that guy. All in all, I was pretty right on the money as far as my predictions went. In exactly 5 books that I find them deserving of love. However, as I stated early in the video, I felt like the bar is currently set at please don't introduce the couple by having the male lead sexually assault the female. However, unlike with the billionaire romances, there was way more nuance with my answers. Soft no's and yeses. Stuff that went flying out the window the second that this billionaire romances forgot that consent is key when introducing yourself to an attractive stranger. Anyway, up next by request is military romance, followed by another request of teachers. I'm going to be trading off between the two of them for a while, so hopefully it won't take me half as long to get through both of those as it did billionaire romances and doctor romances. See you next time, guys!